Hello everybody, my name is Professor Rich. If you want to improve your reading skills in English, then you came to the right video. In this video, we'll be talking about reading, and specifically, we'll be looking at the individual sub-skills of reading. So we think of reading as one of the main skills of language learning. You may think of reading, speaking, listening, writing, and perhaps if you are a very modern language learner, we may include the term grammaring, as coined by Scott Thornberry. But then within reading, we also have these things called sub-skills. And they can actually really help. They can really help with your learning if you understand what these sub-skills are and how you can improve them. So welcome to everybody joining us today. Welcome to Tetsuro and Julia and Sleepwalker. Hello, how are you doing? Also, we ran a poll in the chat where I said, do you know what sub-skills are? Do you think about them? So just 40% of you think about sub-skills. Hopefully, after today's class, that will be a few more people. Hi also to Zoya and Alexander. So our first question today, what is a sub-skill? Well, I gave a bit of a hint about that in the intro, but let's forget about language learning for a moment, and let's consider learning something else. Let's consider learning martial arts. Boxing or karate or something like that. This is my buddy Velociraptor. You can see he's doing karate there. Now, when you learn a martial art like karate or boxing or something like that, we don't simply go to class and learn boxing, but actually we need to learn many different things in boxing. We need to learn how to breathe properly. We need to learn the guard. We need to learn to dodge. We need to learn how to move our feet. We need to learn how to throw a punch. And there's different kinds of punch. We can throw a jab and we can throw a cross. We can throw a hook. We can throw an uppercut. And we can practice individually those punches, you know, and you'll see this. You see boxers in the boxing gym and they're practicing the same punch. They're focusing on that one punch, that one sub-skill of boxing. Let's consider something else. Let's consider playing guitar. And here's Velociraptor with the guitar. So when you learn to play guitar, one does not simply learn to play guitar. In fact, you have to learn how to hold the guitar. And that can take some time, actually. There's a correct position, correct wrist position, right hand position. So we can practice that. That's a sub-skill of playing guitar. Then we learn putting the fingers on the notes. That's a sub-skill of guitar. And you can have special practice activities where you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You see my hand? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we do that on the guitar going down the neck. So on the top string, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we play the note, ding, 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 and then next string, ding, 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 next string, ding, 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 right? That is practicing the sub-skill of putting your fingers on the guitar. Another sub-skill of guitar is strumming. That's when we play the whole chord, right? And we know, for example, Oasis now in the news, reunion tour. Everyone's talking about Oasis, in England anyway. And Oasis famous for the song Wonderwall. It's not a song that I particularly like, but Wonderwall is a perfect example of strumming. Jing and jing, jinga jinga jing, jing jinga jinga jing, jinga jing jinga jinga jinga. That's guitar strumming. And that strumming with the right hand, that's a sub-skill of guitar playing that you can practice. And in fact, if you want to become a good guitar player, you should practice it. So these are examples of sub-skills for learning other things. Of course, on this channel, we are concerned with language learning. And specifically today, we're going to talk about reading. Oh, I have a few more examples. Let's have a look at a few more examples first. So throwing sub-skills. Look at the picture. We're considering something as simple as throwing. Take a ball and throw it. Can we consider sub-skills in throwing? Of course we can. You've got how to hold the ball. You might think that's very simple, but talk to a professional baseball player and ask them about how to hold the ball. It's not so simple. There are many ways to hold the ball, some very strange ways. But if you hold the ball in different ways, then you can throw it and the ball will do different things. So holding the ball is a sub-skill. We've got moving your arm, how you move the arm. Aiming. So aiming, you look at the target and you want to get the ball to hit a certain place. And moving your feet. Because actually when you throw, you normally move your feet in some way as well. So you can see that even something that seems very simple like throwing, we can break it into sub-skills and we can talk about them. Likewise, with using a smartphone, we could talk about things like this. Unlocking the phone, typing on a touch screen, using apps, swiping the screen, and taking photos. So by now, we probably have a pretty clear idea of what sub-skills are. Now, maybe, hello, Rich, hello. Can we get into learning about reading? Can I also say hello there to Enrique? Hello there to Tetsuru again. Hello to Gloria Atukuswe. Gloria. Hello, Gloria. Hello, Asmana. And hello, Pachu. Pachu says everything is a sub-skill. Okay, Pachu, let's save that one for the philosophy class or for the Q&A at the end of class. So, we know what a sub-skill is, but at this point, you might say, Rich, why should I care about sub-skills? I just want to learn English. What is this nonsense? So let me talk to you a little bit about why you need to know. What's the point? Well, first of all, it's about taking control of your learning, because it is 100% certain that if you have a good teacher, they will think about sub-skills when they're teaching you. That is 100% certain. Okay, it's 99.99999% certain. I just thought of a teacher who never learned how to teach, so doesn't know the word for sub-skill, but happens to be a very good teacher through luck and experience. It's possible. But most of the time, your teacher will be thinking about the sub-skills they're teaching you. And teachers often talk about sub-skills when we're planning lessons. So for you to know sub-skills, this allows you to take control of your learning. And by the way, you should always take control of your learning. Don't just leave it up to somebody else, like I did for a lot of my life. And I think many people do. We just leave other people to teach us everything, and we don't think about what we want to focus on and what we really need. We are the people who know better than anyone, or at least we have the opportunity to know better than anyone where our problems are. So if we know about sub-skills, we can better take control of our learning, and we can be people, we can be autonomous learners, which means people who teach themselves. Focused learning. This is probably one of the more obvious points. If we think back to the example about martial arts, maybe I'm doing martial arts and I want to get better. And, let's say I'm really good at punching. Like, my punch is just really good. It's bang, 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 right? I have a good punch. But my martial arts seems to be kind of stuck, right? Kind of stuck. Why don't I get better? I'm always in intermediate class. My punch is really good, but I'm always in intermediate class. What's going on there? And I keep training, but I never seem to get better. This is where we need some focused learning. This is where perhaps you need to focus on a sub-skill that you don't normally think of. Maybe you need to focus on the fitness sub-skill. Maybe you need to focus on dodging. Maybe you need to focus on grappling. Maybe you need to focus on blocking. The point is that by focusing on a different sub-skill, you can get to the next level. We often call this getting over a plateau. So when we improve in our language learning, we come up like this, dun, 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 dun. And then sometimes we get to this intermediate area and it feels like we don't go anywhere. We're sort of stuck. Nobody likes that. So you're kind of stuck. And then maybe what you need is to focus on a new sub-skill and to break out of that plateau. So we can do focused learning and we can get over a plateau. In addition, of course, sub-skills, focusing on sub-skills allows us to be more efficient because we can target certain areas where we're weak. I'm basically saying the same thing, but in a different way. Okay. So by this point, I guess you should be pretty convinced that you do need to know about sub-skills. So in this class, broadly speaking, I've split reading sub-skills into 5 categories. So you could think of this as being the skill, and then there's the sub-skill categories, and then we're going to have the sub-skills under that. Just excuse me for 1 second. All right. So the 5 groups which I've separated sub-skills into are strategy. And strategy is kind of like how you deal with text. So how you cope with a text. How do you make yourself able to read the text? That is strategy. Understanding or comprehension, which I think is pretty self-explanatory, but we'll be looking at the sub-skills within that category. Analysis, which is thinking about the text as we read or after we read in order to discover something or investigate something about the text. And by the way, in language learning, analysis can be very helpful if you're trying to improve your vocabulary or improve your writing. Language, it probably comes as no surprise that language is a part of language learning. And when I say language, I mean things like vocabulary and stuff like that. And then we have speaking. And you might say to me, Rich, I thought this lesson was about reading. Yes. But can we think of how speaking and reading can relate? Now, there's some specific areas where reading and speaking do, in fact, relate. Think about giving a speech. Think about presenting something. Think about actors on a stage. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Okay, so moving on to the first area. The first area is strategy. So let's talk a bit about the sub-skills of strategy. What's the first one, Rich? Let's have a look. The first sub-skill of strategy I'm going to talk about is pre-activation. We're starting with something which for many learners might actually seem quite complicated. I mean, it's quite a complicated word, and actually, it's quite a complicated thing as well. But I think it makes sense to talk about pre-activation first, because pre-activation is something that you do before you read. And actually, we do it kind of naturally, but also it's useful to intentionally do it as well. Most good language teachers will use pre-activation in their class. So what is pre-activation? Pre-activation is basically getting your mind to think about the topic just before you read. Okay? And this can be several different things. It could be looking at a picture. So we look at a picture of a car, and then we read the article below, which is about cars. It could be talking with someone. We have a conversation with our friend about cars, and then he shows us an article about cars. Or it could be just thinking about the topic. I'm thinking about a new car, and then I go and read some articles about cars. Pre-activation is scientifically proven to increase understanding. So by doing pre-activation, you will actually understand more when you read. That's scientific fact. So let's try it. Here's a picture for you, everybody. Now, you smart folks in the chat, can you tell me what things you can see in the picture? Let's see how your vocabulary is in this area. And also I'll say hello, Lila. What things can you see in the picture? And if you're watching the video, then you can take a look, take your lovely notepad and pen and start writing down the things you can see. You have 1 minute. We've got Sleepwalker with the healthy food, fruits, Pachu, fruits, Alexander, a fruit basket, F-R-U-I-T, a basket of fruits filled with a myriad of fruits. Julia there showing off the myriad, using a myriad of, which means a wide range or a broad selection. And there's Zoya with the specifics. We've got pineapples, bananas, grapes, apples, oranges. Which of those is your favorite? Which one do you like the most? This is another nice, engaging pre-activation question. Which of those fruits do you like the most? gets us thinking about the topic. All right. So now we've had a little think about this topic. We've talked about a picture, which is one of the techniques of pre-activation I spoke about. Now we could go and read an article about food or fruits or healthy food, and it is scientifically shown that we will understand more because we've talked about fruit before we go and read the article. That is scientifically true. And something quite related to this is the idea of prediction. So prediction is a little more focused than pre-activation, and prediction is a sub-skill which can happen not only before you read, but also while you read. So let's take a look at a title here of an article, and it says, "The 12 best breakfast foods to eat in the morning." The 12 best breakfast foods to eat in the morning. Now, if we're going to read an article like that, we might ask ourselves before we read, what do you think the healthiest foods for breakfast are? Or we could also say, what foods do you think will be in the article? It's better for us to have our opinion here to say, what do we think the healthiest foods are? Because that gives us something to compare with the article. And when we have our opinion and we can compare our opinion to the article, then that actually really helps our comprehension. And it also gives us some motivation to read. So by making a prediction, we give ourselves something to compare to the article. This is why prediction can be so powerful, because prediction is useful even if your prediction's wrong. So the worst answer, when a teacher says to you, what do you think this article will say? The worst possible answer is, I don't know, I have no idea. Because that's not a prediction. You need to make some sort of prediction. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your prediction's wrong. That's not a problem. But you have to try and make one, because we've got to have that personalized opinion which we can then compare to the article. On a similar topic, we can talk about exploratory questions. So exploratory questions are questions that we have about a topic that we want to know. And you might see this task in English classes sometimes, that before you read a text, the teacher will say, write 3 questions that you want to know about this topic. So we're going to read the article, the 12 best breakfast foods to eat in the morning. What are 3 things that you want to know about breakfast? And you write down your 3 questions. Doesn't matter what they are, just think, what do I want to know about breakfast? Okay, how much should I eat? When should I eat? Is salmon healthy for breakfast? Okay, you write down your 3 questions, whatever they are, doesn't matter. And these are called exploratory questions. These are kind of questions about things you want to know. It's like when we have the Q&A at the end of the class, then you have questions for me. Those are actually like exploratory questions, and it's like I'm the text, right? So exploratory questions can help you with that. An example here might be, how many fruits will he mention? And now we move on to a favorite. And I think when you talk about reading sub-skills, this is probably the first thing that comes to mind for most people, which is skimming, of course. So, skimming, it's one of those things that people can often talk about, but actually not quite so many people understand it. So why don't we get specific about what skimming actually is? Skimming is not just reading fast. Skimming is not simply reading fast. There is more to it than that. Skimming is looking very quickly at a text and getting an idea of what it's about. That's specifically what it is. So we're not reading fast. We're not trying to read many words fast. That's not skimming. Skimming is we look over it, we use all of the context, right? Like, what does it look like? Are there any pictures? What headlines and words and phrases jump out at us? And from that, very quickly, like a minute or less, ideally, we have some idea of what that is. And you might notice how skimming actually is related to pre-activation, because by skimming, we're actually doing pre-activation as well, aren't we? We skim and we go, what's all this about? And that gets our mind working and gets us thinking about the topic, and it's a bit of pre-activation. So you'll see this is kind of a representation for me about how this might work. You look at the whole article, you can see, oh, it's a website. Oh, it's about the 12 best breakfast foods to eat in the morning. Oh, look, it's a list. Oh, look, chai seeds are on there and cottage cheese. Okay, chai seeds, cottage cheese, smoothie jumps out to me, berries, the best foods to eat. It's a website. There's a picture. Okay, now I have some idea of what this article's about. That's skimming. Is that what you thought skimming was? Because that's what it is. And normally I would say less than a minute for skimming. Sometimes teachers will give 5 minutes for skimming and students just start reading. That's not what I call skimming. Because when we think of skimming, we have to think, how will we do it in the real world? You know, when I'm going through websites in the real world, sometimes it takes me less than 10 seconds to know that I don't want to read that article. So how, in 10 seconds, how can I know that I don't want to read the article? Well, it's because I'm using skimming, whether I know it or not. I'm just looking very quickly at a website and I'm making a decision. What's this about? Do I want to read it? Right? So that's it. That's skimming. And Pachu's saying 3 seconds. Exactly. The point is, often people think skimming is a bit longer than that. It's not. Think about an exam. Sometimes in an exam, you only have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to deal with one text. You can't spend 5 minutes skimming. That's not going to work. Okay, moving on from skimming, we have a similar word, which is actually a very different skill, which is scanning. So sometimes there's some, excuse me, I have a very itchy nose today. Sometimes there's some kind of confusion between skimming and scanning, but they are distinct, very distinct, in fact. Scanning is kind of like when you go to a website and you press Control F and you try to find a word on the website. That's like scanning. It's like a search. You're searching through the text to find something, some specific mention of something. Now, scanning we could use in a case like this. It says here, the text recommends eating whole grain toast with cheddar cheese. Cheddar cheese is one of my favorite English cheeses. I think cheddar is probably the best cheese in the world. And I know that that's a very controversial statement. The text recommends eating whole grain toast with cheddar cheese. True or false? So this is the kind of question that you would get, which might seem like a good scanning question, because here we need to look through the text quickly and find, where does the text mention cheese and toast? Or specifically, actually, where does it mention toast? We want to find about toast, don't we? So we'll start off, we have the text, and then as we look down, we find that in the text there's a section about toast. So when we have our section about toast, then we want to say, well, does it mention cheese? And actually, yes, it does seem to mention cheese. It mentions you compare whole wheat toast with, and we list some things, and oh, look, cheese. Oh, but we need to check that. It says cheese, but what's that? It looks different. Ah, cottage cheese. That's tricky, isn't it? So now we know that the sentence is false, because it's not cheddar cheese, it's cottage cheese. And you can see the process here, that with scanning, what I've done is we've gone from the whole article, we've found the section on whole grain toast, we've seen that this section mentions that you can pair whole wheat toast with foods, and we've seen cheese, and then we look carefully at that and we see, it's not cheddar cheese. And now we know it's false. And that is the sub-skill of scanning. So hopefully you can see now that actually skimming and scanning are quite distinct. Quite distinct indeed. All right. Let's move on to our next strategy type skill. Actually, I could have put this one in analysis as well. With skills and sub-skills and stuff, there are many different ways of classifying them, and you have to choose one. So I put annotation in strategy because it can help with understanding, and annotation is something that I encourage my students to do. This is annotation. So annotation is using your lovely highlights. Have you got highlights? Are you a student? Do you have highlights? Do you have multiple colors? If you don't have multiple colors, why not? Get yourself some highlights and use them. So making notes, making highlights, this is called annotation. I find this very useful, and I particularly find it quite interesting to have a look at something which I previously annotated and try to understand why I highlighted certain parts and see if I still agree with my own little notes at the side. I remember I used to have a friend. I remember a friend of mine once spoke to me about how they really enjoy buying second-hand books, particularly if they have notes in them, because part of their experience of reading the book was heightened by seeing someone else's notes, even if it was just highlights, underline, or notes in the side, because it gave them someone else's perspective in order to consider and contrast with their own. That's annotation. Finally, in our strategy section, we have metacognition. It's a fancy word, but it's a simple thing, and we all do it. Metacognition is simply thinking about thinking. So actually, just by talking about subskills, we are engaging in metacognition. All of this is metacognition. Talking about how to learn or how to read, that's metacognition. We are thinking about thinking processes. Metacognition can also be, as you're reading, you notice what you're doing. That can be metacognition. So it's like thinking about thinking. And you can basically consider that this whole class this whole video is a metacognition video. So that brings us to the end of our section on reading strategy. Next, we're going to talk about understanding. But before we do, let's take a quick little look here at what you guys are saying in the chat. So Pallavi's joined us, and Pallavi says, I don't like cheese. Have you tried lots of different types of cheese, Pallavi? There's lots of different types. Lots. Mozzarella, halloumi, cheddar, manchego. Manchego? Is that right? Brie. Ooh, brie. Lots of cheese. I love cheese. I love it. Are the emojis on your screen bothering you, teacher? No, of course not. I implemented that on the stream. I like it. It's fun. It adds some dynamic to the class. I think it's a bit fun. I like to highlight, but teachers say don't write in your book. It will look ugly. Is it your book? If it's your book, if you bought the book and it's your book and it's not like a special copy that you want to be perfect, then why not? You can do what you want with your own book. Teachers say don't write in your book. I need to talk to your teachers. Can you ask your teachers to come and see me in my office, Pallavi? I need to talk to them. Thinking about thinking. Yes, for example, Pallavi, talking about skimming and scanning. Because skimming and scamming involve a lot of kind of thinking strategy, right? And if we're thinking about skimming and scanning, that's a metacognitive process. If we want to get more literal about it, we could consider something like, what do you normally think about while you read? And it doesn't matter what you answer with, whether you say, oh, I imagine pictures, or I have voices in my head, or I hear my own voice, or my mind is blank. Whatever you answer, it doesn't matter. By answering that question, you are engaging in metacognition. And Derek Nguyen is joining us. Hello, Derek. How are you doing? And here we go. It's Manuel Gordillo. Pues empieza la fiesta. Se está haciendo alucinante. Can you say that? Oh, my Spanish is rusty. Okay. Let's talk about the second group. understanding. Meaning from context, baby. Anyone who's been watching this channel for some time will know that I'm big into meaning from context. I think it's really important. It's really important to understand what is context, and it's important to develop the skill of meaning from context. Let's practice. Look at that. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? Does anyone know? Does anyone know what this symbol is? Now, in the context of language learning, we're all pretty good at this. So well done to everyone who's broken through my illusion. Lots of people there getting it right away. I'm quite impressed. I should have made this a little more difficult. We can, of course, quite clearly see here what it means. And in addition to seeing what it means, we know a few other things now. We know how to say it. In this word, we would say "e." Of course, that particular symbol in a different word could be a different sound, but here we can see that it's "e." Okay? So that was the little shape. Here it's very clear what it is. It's very clear that it is an E and the sound is "e." And we can see the letters after and before it. And actually, now that we see this, maybe we start to feel something about it as well. So it has more meaning. Maybe we start to like it. We start to think, oh yes, I quite like that little symbol. It's part of hello. And the hello has an exclamation mark. And there's a nice little smiley face there as well. So this symbol, which previously didn't have a lot of meaning, now it has quite a lot of meaning, actually. And it has emotional meaning, and it has linguistic meaning, and it has dialogic meaning, and it has all kinds of meaning. So the point here is that meaning often comes from the context. Some meaning does come from the actual thing, but a great deal of meaning comes from the context. And so, of course, we can very often deduce a lot of things about the meaning of something from the context. Actually, we can often get the majority of meaning from the context, which is why sometimes we need to just put away Google Lens, drop the translator, pick up a book and read it, and don't worry too much about the exact meaning of things. Just try to guess the meaning from context. That's a very important comprehension skill in reading. All right. Now moving on to summarizing, a bit more of an academic skill, although could also be useful in business. Summarizing, quite simply, is turning this horrible stack of papers into one little summary. And by the way, ChatGPT is very good at this. However, I would also recommend practicing this as a sub-skill. It is beneficial for you. And remember, one of the important things about sub-skills is that by practicing them, the whole gets greater. So when we focus on individual sub-skills, the macro skill often improves. So even if we don't care a lot about summarizing, because perhaps I'll just say, look, I can just use ChatGPT to summarize now. So why do I need to learn how to do it? Because by learning how to do it, you will improve your reading overall. Visualization. So this, of course, goes back to the question of what exactly is it that enters your head while you're reading? What things go through your mind? Well, perhaps something that should go through your mind, particularly if you're quite visual, is some sort of visualization, images, and imagination. Now, this process often happens quite naturally. However, when we're reading outside our own language, perhaps reading something in another language like English, then we need to force the issue a little bit. And so we can take a moment to imagine what exactly it is that we're reading about. So while we're reading, we might want to just take a moment and really try to picture that. And that sort of helps this sub-skill to develop. I had another friend. I'm talking about my friends like they're all dead. That's not true. What I mean to say is one of my friends once said, they know something is a well-written story when, whilst reading it, they forget that they are reading it. In other words, the writing is so good that their attention turns instead to the imagination and visualization in their mind rather than the words on the page. So this is how people who read stories quite a bit will often describe them as being better than movies, better than films. And people who read often prefer the book to the film because they have the film as well in their head, except it's 10 times better than the real film, especially if the film is made by Disney or Hollywood, who can't make good films anymore. Interpreting charts. So we've got a bit of an IELTS-y one here. IELTS, task one of the writing, actually often involves quite a bit of reading. You have to interpret a chart, which is, in fact, what I would call a reading skill. Now, of course, also in that task, you have to write about it, which is writing. But this part of looking at the chart and understanding it, for me, this is a reading sub-skill, which relates to the category of understanding. We're getting into things which are a little bit more complicated now. Monitoring and fix-up. What do you think that might be? Any suggestions in the chat? What do you think I'm talking about when I talk about monitoring and fix-up? And let's take a little look at the comments here. And Cow is in the area. And Shimi, hello there, Shimi, how are you doing? Sleepwalker says it's better to read first and then watch a movie. And Pallavi says you just include IELTS in everything. Yes, Pallavi, it's a marketing strategy because IELTS is probably the most popular language examination in the world. And so I like to contextualize things on this channel in terms of IELTS because we do, of course, talk about IELTS strategy on this channel all the time. And we may be doing some IELTS speaking practice at the end of class today. And so if you would like some speaking and feedback at the end of class, then get your microphone ready and get ready to join Zoom, and we'll do a little bit of speaking practice and feedback. And I look forward to that at the end of class today, as long as I don't fall apart. This is quite a long class and we have quite a lot to still get through. So there's a few people here guessing about what this might do, but no one seems to know quite clearly. Now, Cow has quite a good understanding, or there's quite an interesting idea here about specifically fix up. So I'm going to tell you here about monitoring and fix up. So monitoring is kind of like metacognition, but we might better put it as meta-awareness. In other words, we are aware of our own focus. And so it's like we're reading and then we lose focus and start to think about music or beautiful people or God or something. By the way, if you start thinking about God, that's a good thing. And maybe you put the book down and continue thinking about God for a little bit. I have to say that as a Christian, the best thing to think about is God. However, in terms of monitoring, we might find our mind turning to different things, thinking about different things, and then we realize, oh, I haven't been reading. I've sort of not paid attention to the book, and I didn't really read the last 3 pages. Have you ever had that happen where you've been reading and then you realize, oh, what happened? It's like your mind drifted away and suddenly you're not thinking about the actual book anymore. So that is monitoring. So then after that, we have fix up. So fix up is, oh, I need to go back and read those pages again. Or maybe I need to change the book for an easier book because maybe it's too difficult and that's why my mind wandered. Maybe I need to go and have a coffee. That's a perfectly viable strategy for fix up, is to go and have a coffee and boost your attention. So that's the idea of monitoring and fix up. And that's a sub-skill of reading, which I think a lot of us can probably relate to. And finally, in the understanding section, we're going to talk about nuance just a little bit. Nuance, by definition, is complex. But actually, by definition, that's what nuance is. Nuance is the differences, the intricacies, the complexities, and the small changes in meaning which are by nature sophisticated, complex, and slightly more challenging to notice or understand. And we could talk about nuance for hours, but I don't want to get too philosophical about it. Needless to say, nuance is quite a complex skill, quite a complex sub-skill and it comes at quite higher levels. But it is something you may wish to work on, particularly if you're going into academia or if you wish to become a writer yourself. Then, of course, you should have a very deep interest in nuance. And that takes us to the end of our section on understanding. So let's have a look what people are saying in the chat. People still talking about IELTS. Let's not have arguments about IELTS, folks. I'll make it quite simple for you. I will continue to talk about IELTS on the channel because some people on the channel are interested in it. It is the most popular language exam and it's definitely one of the best in terms of actually checking language ability. Personally, I think that Cambridge English Advanced was the best. I'm not sure now, but IELTS is up there. It's a very good exam, although expensive, and it's an area of interest for many people on YouTube. And so we will contextualize things to IELTS. I hope that doesn't bother you too much. Thanks to the Johnny Depp trial, it helps me understand and remember this word. Is that nuance? Well, nuance is very important when it comes to legal issues. Needless to say, it's a complex skill. That's absolutely right. Oh, Pallavi getting a bit spicy. Okay. Okay. Calm down. Have a tea, Pallavi. The only disadvantage of IELTS is that it expires in 2 years. Yes, although, Zoya, arguably, that actually makes it more valuable to employers. Because if someone took Cambridge English Advanced 15 years ago, which is very possible, is that necessarily a good indication of their language level now? I'm not so sure. However, unfortunately, having to take the thing every 2 years does come with some specific economic challenges. TOEFL is an American thing, and I don't really know a lot about it. I think it's often used as an entrance mark for universities in the United States. And by the way, this is a good time for me to mention, smash that like button and hit subscribe, particularly if you're new to the channel. Welcome here and say hello in the chat as we carry on with our class today. So we're now going to move on to language, the language group. So we're talking about the sub-skills of reading in the category of language. And first and foremost, of course, we have everybody's favorite, vocabulary. I'm going to take my hat off because it's a little bit hot. So, now I've got the red line. Wonderful. So, vocabulary. I don't think we really need to say much about vocabulary, do we? I think we kind of know. In general, my recommendation with vocabulary is to notice useful phrases and collocations and things like that. Don't worry too much about individual words that you don't understand, unless you particularly want to focus on that. Rather, most of the time we should be focusing on phrases and collocations. And also, if you spend time checking and learning vocabulary in texts, then you should be choosing vocabulary which you wish to use. In other words, vocabulary which you wish to become part of your active lexicon, vocabulary which you want to use in the future. Okay, moving on. Punctuation. Of course, punctuation is a subskill knowledge area of reading. If we start to understand what a dash, hyphen, semicolon, colon, full stop means, that can help us with reading. Also, commas. Commas are not simply a pause. Commas, in fact, can mean lots of different things, and they can have a very important meaning distinction. For example, if we compare that student, comma, who climbed Mount Everest, comma, is a good student. In that case, I'm saying that student over there is a good student, and, by the way, they climbed Mount Everest. However, if I say that student who climbed Mount Everest with no comma, that student who climbed Mount Everest is a good student, I mean the one student out of a group of students who climbed Mount Everest is a good student. And if you didn't quite follow that, you should check my other class on defining relative clauses and non-defining relative clauses. I have spoke about it before. You can ask about it at the end of class if you wish. Prefixes, suffixes, and word roots. I think it's very useful to learn about prefixes, suffixes, and word roots. We can have a good example actually from today's class. So I talked a little bit about metacognition earlier. That was one of the sub-skills that we discussed. And we can, in fact, break down metacognition into the prefix, suffix, and the root. So the prefix here is meta. Meta means above or beyond. Cogni, which means think. And shun, which is the noun form. So we have above or beyond thinking, the noun form. And when we think of above and beyond in meta, we often mean kind of like above and looking down to the previous thing. So metacognition is above and looking down at thinking. Register. So this is talking about things like formality. Which is more formal? Got a coffee for you. Here's a coffee if you'd like. Complimentary coffee is available. So which of those do you think is more formal? Of course, it's number 3. How do we know that? Well, there's no contraction, and we use bigger words. Number 2 is neutral. We have contraction, 2 contractions. And number 1 is informal. We have ellipsis, which means dropping words. And we have the use of got instead of I have got, just got a coffee. And also I said for you instead of for you. So you at the end like that sounds very informal. And that's register. Variants. just a brief note on variants. So, variants are language variations. For example, if you're reading South African English book or an Australian book, then you're going to get slightly different language. We can also talk about subvariants, like an author from Manchester or Liverpool might write some things that are a little bit different than an author from London. This is particularly noticeable in books like, I think it's called Pez, P-E-Z, which is a story about a small boy from Yorkshire, and it uses a lot of contextual language relating to Yorkshire in the northeast of England. And that's the end of our section on language. So, we're now moving on to analysis. And analysis is really important, especially if you're going into academia. But also, for most language learners, we need to engage in some analysis when we're learning English. Analysis helps us to engage, it helps generate interest, it helps to set up activities, and it helps us to understand the language, and it helps us to improve our writing. So the first area of analysis we might think about is structure. So we might look at how a text is structured, and that, of course, will help our writing. We can see here a structure that a lot of you may well be familiar with. That's the structure of a simple essay. And by analyzing structure and talking about it, then we can improve our writing and we can improve our understanding and analysis of future essays. We have tone, and you can see there that in brackets next to tone, I put overt. And you might say, well, Rich, what's this overt? So overt means I'm open and clear and you can see me. Open, clear, here I am, overt. So when I say tone here, I'm talking about something which is not hidden, but actually is quite open and visual, and you can see what my tone is. And it's useful to notice that. Is someone being friendly? Are they being critical? What is their tone? That's the overt side of tone. Now we can contrast that with one of the sub-skills a little bit later, which talks about something beyond tone. We have cross-checking. Cross-checking is looking at multiple texts and referencing information between texts. This is highly important for academia and for certain roles such as research, the police, lawyers, politicians. Evaluating arguments is a critical skill for anyone in life, in my opinion. So it's important for us to be able to evaluate the quality of an argument that someone makes. And then critical thinking, which is related to arguments. So critical thinking, how is critical thinking different from evaluating arguments? So basically, evaluating arguments is your ability to look at an argument that someone talks about and to decide if it's a good argument. Critical thinking goes beyond that. Critical thinking means that we're not simply going to accept as true something that someone says to us for any particular reason. So no matter what it is, who says it, and where it comes from, we're not necessarily going to accept that as the truth, but rather we're going to think about it and decide for ourselves if it's true. This is a very, very important skill, especially in today's world. And I would go further and I would say, in fact, if the person who's telling you something is so sure and comes from a position of experience and prestige, and they have lots of information and studies to back them up, then more than ever, that's when you need critical thinking. Because, you know, it's very, very easy to employ critical thinking when the crazy homeless guy on the street says, the world is ending in 5 days. Of course, we can all employ critical thinking there and say, well, I don't think that's true. That's not difficult, okay? That's really not difficult. What's difficult, maybe, is turning on the BBC, listening to the news at 10, listening to the headlines about the United States presidential election and other topics, and deciding for yourself just how true is this that the BBC is saying to me. Which brings us on to intent and bias. Domestic terrorist attack or mostly peaceful protesters? Should we accept either of these standpoints? Related is the idea of rhetoric and manipulation. So, rhetoric is the clever use of language to persuade someone of something. In general, rhetoric is correlated with intelligence. Do you know what that means? That means if someone happens to be blessed with a very high IQ, in general, their rhetoric will be better. Have you ever tried arguing with someone who's very smart and stubborn? How is it that they always seem to be right? Are they really always right? Or are they just very good at using rhetoric? So we need to be careful of rhetoric. We need to be careful of persuasive language. Because, of course, rhetoric is used for manipulation. And sometimes people who are using rhetoric for manipulation are not fully aware that they're doing that. They just do it. So, have to be careful with that. And here's where the idea of rhetoric originally comes from is philosophy. People would use rhetoric to convince people of their arguments. And then Plato and Aristotle and so on came along and said, look, I don't care about your rhetoric. I want to talk about the arguments alone. Inference. So, inference means we look at the text, but we try to get ideas of things beyond the text. So, for example, I might read that text about the healthy breakfast foods to eat, and I might make the inference that the person who wrote it knows nothing about food. That would be inferring that from the text. Alternatively, I could read it and decide it's a good idea right now to invest in pineapples. That would be an inference from the text. The text doesn't say to invest in pineapples, but I might infer from the text that it's a good idea to invest in pineapples. And that brings us to the end of our section on analysis. Absolutely anyone who's in business or politics uses rhetoric at the very least. The reality is, Shimi, that at most levels, everyone uses rhetoric to some extent. I'm using it right now, whether I know it or not. When me and my wife have a conversation, we will use it. Actually, as a rule, I'm quite good at rhetoric when it comes to logical arguments, which I think can probably be quite frustrating for people around me sometimes. It's quite a bad combination to be a philosopher and to be good at rhetoric, actually. But luckily, I'm not that good. And that's good for me and for the people around me. But yes, certainly in business and politics, you'll see a lot of rhetoric. And we've got Nitesh in the house. All right, so now we're moving on to speaking. This is the one that might confuse you a little bit. How can we possibly have a group of speaking skills as a category of reading sub-skills? Rich, have you gone mad? Have you gone mad? No, because we can think about speaking related to reading. The first one is decoding, and you may have heard this before. There are different ways that we can talk about decoding. Decoding, when we're talking about reading, means being able to look at the little symbols on the page and being able to imagine or turn that into the spoken word, the spoken words. Okay? It's not necessarily actually reading it out loud. So it's not necessarily actually saying it, but it's looking at the word and knowing how to say it and what it means and so on. So that's decoding. And we can also talk about decoding in the area of listening and in conversation. And then we have word phonemics. So word phonemics would be specifically the sounds involved in a word. Also, it would include the word stress. So progress versus progress. Progress, progress. That's word phonemics. We might also have I read many books. I read 2 books yesterday. Read and read. The word is written the same, but the phonemics are different, and actually that also affects the meaning in that case. Then we have words like often and often, or schedule and schedule, which are the same word with the same meaning, but you can say it different ways. Moving on from word phonemics, we have phrasal phonology. So this takes us to the next level, which is where we are not only considering the sounds in a word, but also we are now considering the whole phrase in terms of how the sentence could be said. So this is actually in teaching, this is what we call an utterance. An utterance is like something someone says. So if we have, I am going to go to, then when I say that, I could say, I'm going to go to the park. I'm going to go. I'm going to go. So that's an example of phrasal phonology. We might also have things like linking words. I have 1 elephant, one-elephant. I have 2 welephants. I have 3 yelephants, 3 yelephants. I have 4 relephants. So nelephant, welephant, yelephant, relephant. I have 1 elephant. I have 2 elephants. I have 3 elephants. I have 4 relephants. Those are the linking sounds. Nelephant, yelephant, relevant, welephant. So that's phrasal phonology. And then finally, probably the primary subskill of the reading group is recitation and script reading. This is something which I don't recommend doing when you're giving a presentation. For example, I can tell you right now that I don't have a script, and actually I never use scripts for the class, except sometimes for the first 20 seconds when I give a little description of the class. Sometimes I script that. Sometimes in real classes, I script my questions because questions can be difficult to think of on the spot. So if I want to check the understanding of my students, sometimes I script those carefully. Also, sometimes I do an activity called dictogloss, which we do sometimes live here on the channel, which is that I read a script and then read it again, and then I ask you questions about it. Other areas where you could really use script reading are giving a speech. Although again, I recommend keywords rather than reading a script. Okay, you don't need to be like Kamala Harris. You don't need to read a script all the time. You don't need the teleprompter. Sometimes it's nice just to be natural and talk normally rather than being an actor. However, sometimes when you want to give a speech, or if you want to be, if you really want to be an actor, then reading a script can be good. And it is a skill, and it's a skill which you can develop. You'll notice there are some people on YouTube who are very good at that. And actually, a lot of the other English teachers on YouTube are quite good at that. You can see they read the script. You can tell that they read the script, by the way, because you can see their eyes are like here, and you can see their eyes moving a little bit as they talk. So it's like they're not quite looking at you, but they kind of look just here, right? And that's someone reading a script. But you can become quite good at it. And there are some advantages to it. It can be useful for pronunciation. It can be useful for this, that, and the other. I certainly don't recommend doing it too much. Some teachers, they say, always read out loud. And I really strongly disagree with that. I don't think you should always be reciting at all. In fact, I would recommend against subvocalization, which means, subvocalization is when you pick something up and you kind of go, instructions for use. Take 4 capsules daily before bedtime. Encapsulate foods. Use in conjunction with food as part of a healthy and varied diet, not as a substitute for such. That's subvocalization. I don't really recommend doing that too much. It can help sometimes when you're in very noisy environment or a place where it's a little bit difficult to concentrate. However, when you're reading in an ideal situation, which is you're sitting at home, you've got the plants, you've got Beethoven in the background, and you're reading quietly, you don't need subvocalization. And I recommend that you try not to do it, actually, when you're reading in quiet, because there is evidence to suggest that subvocalization limits your reading ability, particularly your speed. And that brings us to our review of all of the sub-skills that we talked about today. There's quite a great number of them, and probably your mind is buzzing. But remember that, everyone, you can come back to this video whenever you want. I will be sure to insert the chapters down below so you'll be able to see where all of the different sections of these sub-skills are. And as I've said, what can you do? You can go and focus on specific sub-skills which you haven't considered before, or specific sub-skills which you consider to be weaknesses for you, or specific sub-skills which you think you might need in the future. And you can go and learn about those and focus specifically on those. And that has quite a high chance, actually, of improving your overall reading ability. So we talked about strategy. We talked about understanding. We talked about language. And I'll just give you a few seconds just to look over those, remind yourself of those. And you can start thinking now about your questions, because we will be moving into question time in just a moment. So particularly if you have any questions about the reading sub-skills that we've spoke about today, I think now would be a really good time to talk about that. We also spoke about analysis, and we have the sub-skills of analysis right there. And then finally, we spoke about speaking. So make sure that you smash that like button and hit subscribe. You can, of course, support this channel. If you look down below, you can buy me a coffee. Thank you very much, Mr. Gordillo, for the lovely coffee. And we're moving on to question time. So if you have any questions about today's class or about education, English learning, or anything else that you care to ask a question about, you can now type your questions into the chat and I will do my best to answer them. Also, you can download the notes from today. And they are available in the chat, and in just a moment, they will be available right down below the video. So I do agree that reading aloud is a good skill to develop for several reasons, including pronunciation practice, including helping decoding, and also for acting or giving a speech. However, I don't think you should do that too much. And I spoke a little bit about that before, that we really want to avoid subvocalization. So we don't want to always be reading out loud when we're reading. Shall I put my hat back on? Yeah, it's hat time. And now I'm going to stop speaking like Alan Watt. And we're going to go back to rich, natural accent. What's the issue with the BBC in the US elections? Well, let's be critical about it, Alexander. What are they saying about it? And then let's just consider for a second that whatever it is that they're saying, let's consider for a moment that not only is it false, but it's basically the opposite to the truth. Let's just consider that. We don't need that to be reality, but let's consider it for a moment and see where that takes us. That's all I can really say about it. Thank you very much, Mr. Gordillo. Do you have any questions today, sir? That's really cool, actually, Derek. And I actually think that that can be a really useful activity, because what you're doing there has a bit of personalization to it, and it actually has a bit of engagement to it as well. However, I would suggest to you to try not doing it. See what that's like. I'm not saying to stop doing it. I'm just saying to try for a moment not doing it, and then come back and see. Yeah, your comprehension has got very good, Manuel. It's just when I was designing the class, I had Velociraptor on my mind. And so I decided to get a couple of, I used to love Velociraptor. It was by far my favorite meme from the mid-2000s. Zoya says, I've been researching about Cambridge and IELTS. Cambridge reading is considered to be more difficult as it checks your grammar knowledge, and IELTS writing more difficult as it includes charts. I think I would say overall that IELTS is generally more difficult as an exam because IELTS theoretically tests the whole range of levels all the way up to proficient, whereas the Cambridge exams are targeted by level. Now, that doesn't mean that it's more difficult to pass Cambridge Advanced than it is to get a 7.5 in IELTS. That's not necessarily the case. I'm just saying that you can expect not to answer all the questions correct in an IELTS reading exam. Like, it's incredibly difficult to get every question in an IELTS reading exam correct. That's very difficult. However, Cambridge First Certificate, you absolutely could get 100% on a reading exam. It's still difficult, but it's less difficult than IELTS getting a 100%. And that's because if you get 100% on an IELTS reading exam, that would imply that you have proficient English reading, whereas 100% on the Cambridge First Certificate would imply that you have advanced reading. Cambridge First Certificate is the B2 upper intermediate exam. Let's wait a moment, Alex, and we'll get into it in a minute. Let me answer some other questions about English, and then I'll pull up some BBC articles and I'll demonstrate some critical thinking. I'm just being funny, Manuel. Manuel's a very casual guy. You don't need to call him Mr. Gordillo. Sometimes my friends, will call me Mr. Rich, or whatever. It's a silly kind of friendly thing. Or sir. How are you, sir? Sometimes we do this kind of over-the-top formal thing just for fun, but we're still being informal. So Julia has said that some mainstream media are broadcasting propaganda. No, that's not quite right, Julia. Every mainstream media is broadcasting propaganda. There is no such thing as a completely balanced mainstream media source. And we can go from Russia Today to Al Jazeera to BBC to Israeli Times, the New York Post, Fox News. Take your pick. None of them are saying the truth because we are incapable of fully speaking the truth when it comes to events in the world. That's just the nature of being human. It's all perspective. And of course, by nature, it's propaganda. Why? Because they want you to buy or consume their media. So of course it will be propaganda, which is slanted in the direction of encouraging people to buy their media. It's a perspective, Pachu. Blavi says, when we're reading, we imagine actions, characters, scenes, background stories. So imagination can be real or fake or more like fantasy. I'm not sure specifically what you're asking, Pallavi, but I'm tempted to say yes to everything that you just said. I just want to say yes, basically. Taking a sure way for passing tasks or going into dangerous ones as to get better teaching. Not quite. I'm a little bit lost there. Oh, because you were saying, do I agree about that? Yeah. Let me just, I mean, it's an interesting question that Manuel asked you, actually. What are your goals, Zoya? Like, why do you want to take a language exam? And can you be as specific as possible? What do you want it for? And then I can give you some sort of recommendation. Russia today is official government media of a non-democratic regime. Is it? Is Russia a non-democratic regime? Is that true? I don't know, actually. So Russia has a prime minister called Mikhail Mishustin. And was he elected? Oh, amendments to the constitution. It does look a little bit strange, actually. Did they have public elections in Russia or no? I don't know. Are they non-democratic? Propaganda is a Spanish word. Are you sure? Really? Maybe Latin, Manuel. Sorry, Balavi. What do you want to know about visualization? Like, there's no wrong answer here, Pallavi. Like, yes, go into fantasy. Like, go for it. Like that. The more you let your imagination go wild when you read, the better. I think I would go that far as to say that. Like, the more that you're thinking and imagining, you can put yourself in the story if you want. Like, you can be there with the characters, by all means, right? And some people do. Still waiting for Zoya to clarify. I'm still waiting for Zoya to clarify the purpose of taking an exam. We're getting degrees to get a good job in the future. Our main goal is to earn money and live life. I want to hear your criticism on this. Oh no, am I being that critical? I mean, criticism? Do you are we talking here? Let me just full screen. Oh, by the way, smash that like button. Are we talking about the idea of, is the purpose of education to get a good job? Because that's certainly part of it, but I don't think it's the only purpose of education. In fact, it's definitely not the only purpose of education. Definitely not. So I'll say that again, it's definitely not. However, you can go too far on either extreme. So if you spend all your time in education working towards getting a good job with money, then that might not be a great idea. On the other hand, if you spend all your time in education ignoring your prospects of getting a good job, that can also be a not very good idea. So obviously there's some sort of balance here. We have to find a balance between what interests us, what inspires us, what skills we want to learn, what truth we want to discover about the world, and our economic consideration. What are we going to do in the future? How will we pay the bills? How will I pay for my family, etc., etc.? Yeah, I don't know about the situation in Russia. You could well be very correct there, and I can't comment on it, Alexander. But just to contrast, there are 2 presidential candidates in the United States. One of those was selected by members of the party, and the other one was not. One of those they are trying to send to jail, and the other one seems to be very friendly with the entire system, which is trying to send that other candidate to jail. So how much difference is there exactly? Yes, there might be from appearances, and whether it's underground or overground, there could well be some quite serious differences. However, when we look at the bigger picture, perhaps we're not quite having the perfect example of democracy and terrible examples of democracy. I mean, for example, if we agree, let's say Donald Trump is a bad person who should go to jail. Well, in that case, there's only one possible person to vote for in the United States general election. Is it a democracy when there's only one possible person to vote for? Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right, Alexander. Context is the word you want to say here. It depends on context. Propaganda actually does have a negative connotation, but when we say negative connotation, we don't mean that every use of the word is negative. We just mean that in general, it has a negative sense. A good example of this is the word judgment. When I say judgment, in general, people consider that to be negative. So if we say like, oh, we should teach people not to judge others, right? And a lot of people would say that. But actually, judging things actually just means deciding. So if I say, oh, I'm judging that person to not have very effective reading strategies. That is a judgment. But, as you say, the context here is critical. That kind of judgment is not the negative kind that most people think of when they think of the word judgment. We can say similar things about the word argument, like, oh, I have an argument to make. Like in the context of academia, that's perfectly fine. But then if we start talking about arguments in daily life, most people think of that with a negative connotation. They actually think of argument like a fight, or a verbal fight. So you're absolutely right that context is very important. But however, I would just say that it does have a negative connotation. It's just that when something has a negative connotation, it's not necessarily always negative. I have no idea what Manuel just said, but I'm sure it's very, very wise. All right, wonderful. That does bring us to the end of the class today. Now I wonder. Oh, question from Dan. Should it be to be in this sentence instead of to? The calf was recently born to a beloved cow. No. Born to means that the cow was the calf's mother. So the calf was born to a beloved cow means that the cow gave birth to the calf. IELTS, confirmed level of English, yeah. So that's not the case, actually, about IELTS for university. So almost all universities in the UK accept Cambridge Advanced. So if you take Cambridge Advanced, then yes, you can use that for almost all British universities. You should check with the institution, but the vast majority will accept Cambridge Advanced. I mean, these days, some universities accept things like Duolingo qualification and things like that, you know, but they will accept Cambridge Advanced. Yes. What can I say about this? I think what I would say, Alex, is that any established media source at all, Fox News, Sky, BBC, whatever, any established media source that has had time for people to get to positions of power and influence over and above that media source. And I don't think there's any established media source in the world which isn't in that position. Which is why, personally, my preferred source of news is independents, like Glenn Greenwald, Jimmy Dore, Tucker Carlson, and individuals like that. Yes, they have their biases, of course. But with an individual, you know what you're dealing with when it comes to bias. Because actually, as humans, and as the Bible teaches us, you know we know that we're bad, and we can understand when other people, we can see the faults of other people very clearly. But when it comes to an institution, for some reason, we get kind of misled that because this institution's established, we expect it to present some sort of neutral way of reporting things. The reality is they are 100% tools of manipulation because there's vested interests. And of course, with vested interest, they will present a perspective which suits their interests. That goes for all of them. GB News, BBC, The Guardian, The Mirror, The Daily Express. They all have powerful, rich people, sometimes rich people, but certainly powerful, influential people who will control and move the narrative in those organizations. And even when they present the other side, they will do it in a way to make their own perspective look good. And I think you can see that everywhere. And this is why I really like individuals, because, for example, if we take Glenn Greenwald, for example, Glenn Greenwald says things that you can't read anywhere else. If you go to his Substack and have a read, and also go to his Substack, have a read, and tell me if you think he's a good journalist or not. Because I think he's possibly the best living journalist on the planet, or at least close to it. And the things he says, you won't read them anywhere in any Western media anyway. Certainly not in Brazil. You will not read them anywhere in Brazil. And by the way, they championed him in Brazil when he was fighting against Bolsonaro. They were like, oh, Glenn Greenwald's a hero. And now that he's criticizing the current regime, suddenly he's a terrible far-right influencer. Whereas before he was a socialist hero. How does that work? I don't know. But that's why I find him interesting, because he continues to stick to his individual principles. So I like to follow individuals rather than institutions. I mean, yeah, people do pay for it. Like, people pay for it. That's the thing. People. Like, he has a subscription model and his own website, and people go there and pay for him directly. But you know what you're dealing with. You're dealing with this one guy. Right? So you know that he has a certain perspective. But I personally, I find him quite charming and interesting, as well as Russell Brand, Glenn Greenwald, and people like that. Jimmy Dore. Poor old Julian Assange. I don't think there's much left of him, unfortunately. I think it's terrible what they did to him. We could say that he did bad things. You know, the data was released and things happened and so on. But they really wanted to send a message. Now, if you're a journalist and someone comes to you and they give you 100% certain evidence that JFK was assassinated by the CIA, however, if you release the evidence, then it will likely cause a violent revolution in the United States. Now, as a journalist, do you release it or not? I don't know the answer to that, but what I do know is that if you've thought about it carefully and then you publish it, then I think as a journalist, you should be treated as a journalist. And even if you have to suffer some consequences, you should not be sent to a deep, dark prison for decades until your mind and body has rotted away. He was trying to act as a journalist. And they punished him to send a message. That's what they did. They wanted to send a message. Do not mess with the state, because we'll mess with you. And the same thing for Chelsea Manning. What happened to her? Oh, I disagree, Alexander. Maybe that's a personality thing. If someone to me says that the earth is flat, actually, he does automatically become interesting to me. Now, I might quickly after that decide that he's crazy and I don't want to talk to him anymore. But at the first case, just as an example, there's 10 people in a room. I don't know anything about them, but I know that one of them thinks the world is flat. Who is the most interesting at this point? Definitely the guy who thinks the world is flat. Because I want to know how he came to that conclusion. So, yeah, to me it does. Maybe it's something to do with philosophy. I would highly recommend the book from Christopher Hitchens. What's the one? I think it's called something like How to Be a Contrarian or something like that. But I think Christopher Hitchens lays it out quite well. The importance. When someone stands up and says the thing which goes against that which everyone else is thinking, then that's when it's time to really pay attention. It really is. Because the thing that everyone's saying all the time, yeah, okay, everyone's saying that all the time. You know, it's easy to say that, right? It's easy to go out there and to say, this is bad, this is good, because it's what everyone's saying all the time. But to go out there and say the opposite, you've got to have some real balls. I mean, you must be really sure, you've got to be really sure that it's like, if you go out, if I start, like, let's imagine now I start saying to you all that the world is flat. By the way, I don't think the world is flat. See, I need to say that. But let's imagine I start saying it now. I'm like, Professor Rich says the world is flat. Definitely, 100%, it's flat, right? And I start saying that. I mean, I must be really sure about that. Because if I start saying that, then, you know, immediately everyone thinks I'm crazy. I become crazy Professor Rich who thinks the world's flat. You know, maybe start losing friends, start losing career opportunities. You know, it's a risky thing to say. And I think there are other risky things to say. For example, questioning the credibility of the BBC, or questioning the integrity of certain medicine, and so on and so on. Why do they put fluoride in the water, by the way? Is it really to protect our teeth? We get quite a lot of fluoride from the toothpaste in our teeth, and we can spit that out. But of course, in the tap water, we drink it. Why is that? Why is it that very wealthy people often don't drink tap water? They drink bottled water. I don't know. I'm just saying. Maybe it's a personality fault, Alexander. I'm too cynical. Don't worry, though. I do indeed trust in Jesus, my personal savior. Thank you, God. What's this, Dan? He says, you never make me stay, so you take your weight off me. You never make me stay, so you take your weight off me. You take your weight off of me. You never make me stay, so you take your weight off of me. You never make me stay, so you take your weight off of me. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know the song. However, it sounds like it might mean, I need more context, but it sounds like it might mean get off. Like, stop putting things on me. But I'm not sure. I suggest asking ChatGPT. ChatGPT is very good at interpreting song lyrics, especially if you tell him the song name and the name of the person. There were, Alex. I studied it. In 2005, I did a qualification called the NCTJ, the National Council for Training. Do you want me to see if I've got my card? I might have it. Give me a second. Not as easy to find as I thought, unfortunately. But I did a qualification in about 2005, a postgraduate qualification called the National Council for the Training of Journalists. And that is the go-to qualification in order to become a newspaper journalist in the UK. They also had a special broadcast section if you wanted to become a broadcast journalist. And, you know, we studied objectivity for about 1 hour of that course. And then we studied like turning press conferences into news articles. And it was all about getting the spicy, interesting, like sensational part of it. And you put that right at the top as clearly as you can. And we learned how to write in a way which attracted attention and kept eyes on the page. And this was in 2005. And actually, I think in 2005, there were more journalistic practices. Because, for example, in the UK, we had I think it was called the IPC, which was the Independent Press Commission. And they were an organization which attempted to ensure the accuracy of journalism in the UK. And all of the newspapers were part of that organization. And that organization disbanded about 10 years ago. And it was replaced by another organization which most media organizations didn't join. So there is, in fact, no independent press body in the United Kingdom which assures the accuracy of media, news media in the UK. There is one that about 50% of news media are part of. But for example, The Guardian, the newspaper The Guardian, which is famous worldwide, is not part of it. They're not part of it. They just decided we're not going to be part of it. And they say, oh, we check ourselves. We don't need the organization. So, you know, what's the point? You know, if you don't have this independent verifier, then what's the point? And of course, they do have stuff in the United States, but they're very clearly also politically biased and biased in other ways. So, you know, what can you do? But yeah, you know, technically, Alexander, you're right. And the ideal of a journalist is someone who is objective and looks at all of the facts and so on and so on. And we can also say the same about scientists and everything else. Oh, of course you can. Plato's perspective. I'm more of an Aristotelian, but I do really enjoy Plato. I think that the implications of Plato pragmatically are not good. Sorry, I'm running out of steam, Pavio. I've been talking for quite a while. I think one of the issues with Plato's idealism is that no, sorry. I'm too mentally drained to go into it. It's a shame because it's right up my alley. You know, I'd love to talk about Plato, but I just I don't have the mental capacity to get into Plato right now. Yeah, the question is, though, Manuel, what secrets did Julian Assange release which have caused those kinds of effects? Is there one provable person who died as a result of WikiLeaks releases? Is there? I couldn't find one. Not one. I have students from Somali. There is no way I will go to Somali. No offense to anyone who lives there. Not on your life. I wouldn't mind going to Texas, getting a ranch and a gun. That sounds quite fun. A big gun and a big ranch. But yeah, unfortunately, it's easier said than done, Alexander, you know? I mean, unfortunately, it's quite difficult for British people to legally immigrate to the United States. Just one of those things. Reminds me, my friend and co-host of ELT Under the Covers, Neil, his wife is Canadian. Took him years to get the permission to bring her to the UK. She's Canadian. Took years. They had to save up, had to meet all these requirements, so difficult. And yet net migration in the UK, 1 million a year at the moment. What's going on there? Key point, Shimi, is that reading the Bible requires the Holy Spirit to reveal truths to you. And so one of the best approaches that you could take when reading things in the Bible is to pray and ask God to grant wisdom and understanding to you as you read it. There's a vicar who sometimes comes to our church, and when he preaches, he often talks about when he's giving his understandings, he often just prefixes everything with the Holy Spirit revealed to me, and then talks about it. And that seems right to me. Exactly, Alex. But that's the thing as well. By listening to and talking to people who claim the earth is flat, we become more certain about our belief that the earth is not flat. So it in fact gives us rationale and understanding of our own true belief that the world is not flat. Which is one of the reasons why it's good to engage with people who speak out against the consensus. Oh, yeah, of course. Of course I have questions about him. But you know what's interesting, Alex? I don't know if you've watched anything from him recently, but something he said is about a month ago. He said this in an interview. He said, recently I've come to the understanding that we are the subjects of invisible forces of good and evil. And I really believe that. And I can recognize that sometimes I have been the tool of evil. It's very interesting when you hear someone say that, isn't it? Kind of makes your ears pick up when someone in an interview to millions of people acknowledges that they have been the tool of evil. That's quite a confession, don't you think? So, I don't want to say that I don't have questions about his credibility and integrity. I would say I absolutely do. I mean, for one, he called my country a fog-soaked rock in the North Sea. Fog-soaked rock. Excuse me, Mr. Carlson. Fog-soaked rock indeed. So yes, I do have questions. But that doesn't mean I can't listen, appreciate, and in fact glean some truth from the things he says. All right, Pallavi, thank you very much for joining us today. Have a lovely evening. See you again. Piers Morgan's interesting. I like his videos sometimes, yeah. I'm not sure about Putin's propagandist. I watched the video interview between Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin, and I don't think he acted like a propagandist. In fact, I think Tucker Carlson doesn't like Putin. I would be like 99% sure of that Tucker Carlson does not like Vladimir Putin. In fact, he has called him a warmonger recently. However, Tucker Carlson is very critical of the US's involvement before the Ukraine war started and the lead up to that. And I think he believes that the US should be non-interventionalist. In other words, the US should not be going around the world. For example, there are more US army bases around the world than any other country has army bases. They have army bases in the United Kingdom, in Germany, in France, in you name it. They got army bases everywhere. Tucker Carlson believes they should close all those army bases and not have army bases in other countries. And I think he might be right. I'm just saying. Thank you very much, Derek, and I will catch you next time. Dan, those lyrics can mean just leave me to the person. Could do. Interpreting song lyrics is not my forte. It's tricky. Which is next, Zeus and Andromeda, or why the Northern Lights didn't happen in Tenerife? Manuel, let's get into it. We need to work this out. Why don't the Northern Lights appear in Tenerife? Michael Jackson is saying to his beloved or his girlfriend to leave him because he doesn't want to show... Ooh, Pallavi's all over this. Yeah, we'll do another philosophy class at some point. at some point, Pavia. But you know where we are killing it at the moment. Tell you what, that the class that we did about different ages learning English, people love that. Oh. That's been the most successful stream we've ever done on the channel. 100 new subscribers from that. Not much to a big YouTuber, but to this channel, that's massive. And by the way, hello, if any of you are watching right now. Do you realize we're talking about all sorts of things in English? Of course. That's right. You know, also, it's worthwhile noting that if you're having emotional reactions to any of these discussions, that's actually really good for your English learning because you will remember it. You will remember it. Emotional reactions can be, well, really, memory is highly emotional. Try to tell me a memory from 10 years ago which you have no emotion attached to. Do you have any? All right, everybody. Spanish Inquisition. Here's my take. This is going to take about 2 hours, so strap in. Christopher Columbus was an alien. Fact. No, just kidding. Ice cream, yeah. Thank you very much. All right. I don't know. I don't know about find excuses. I mean, he said, we are the subjects of invisible forces of good and evil, and he recognizes that in the past he's been the tool of evil, and he wants to not be the tool of evil, but he's not sure if he is or he isn't. And the interviewer, I can't remember who interviewed him, maybe Joe Rogan. The interviewer said, you know, are you a tool of evil now? And he said, I don't know, but I hope not. I mean, seems like a good start. And he believes that Christians seem to be disproportionately persecuted. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if they're Putin's arguments, you know. I mean, I don't hear anything from him. And I'm not talking about the situation in Ukraine, Alexander. When I say I don't think the United States should have military bases around the world, I'm just saying that I don't think the United States should have military bases around the world. I'm not saying anything about how that relates to any current international situations. That's an opinion which I've had for quite a long time. I'm what you call a non-interventionalist. I don't believe that nation states should kind of go around the world with this globalist attitude, involving themselves in all kinds of other countries' business, you know? I don't think that's right. I think the point of a nation state is to protect and look after the people who live in that country, all of the people who live in that country, not just some of them. So I don't particularly like this idea of the so-called world police. I don't think that that's... Unfortunately, as a Briton, I have to acknowledge that it's something we kind of started, if not the Romans. But I think maybe it's better if the Department of Defense is actually a Department of Defense. Well, we can pray to God, for one. Although, unfortunately, in the Bible, it does appear that something like World War III may well be inevitable at some point. Let's hope not. Just want to remind everyone, because it's got a little bit serious and Pachu's getting very concerned. I have a lot of Ukrainian students. I love my Ukrainian students. And I do not want there to be any more conflict or war in Ukraine or the Middle East or any other places. I think that military and war is one of the worst and most foul things that can happen. But underscoring that, I don't trust a damn thing that any politician or world leader says, or the media. And that includes Putin, and that includes Keir Starmer, and that includes Joe Biden, if indeed Joe Biden is capable of speech at this point. All right. And on that note, thank you very much for joining me today, everybody. Just a reminder that you can download the lesson notes from today from right there. And a reminder of the summary of the sub-skills that we looked at today. We looked at strategy as a group of sub-skills. We looked at the sub-skill of pre-activation, prediction, exploratory questions, skimming, scanning, annotation, and metacognition. We looked at understanding as a group of sub-skills, looking at meaning from context, summarising, visualisation, interpreting charts, monitoring and fix-up and nuance. And language, we looked at vocabulary, punctuation, prefixes, suffixes and roots, register and variance. We also looked at a group of things, analysis. We looked at structure, tone, cross-checking, evaluating arguments, critical thinking, intent and bias, rhetoric and manipulation, and inference. And speaking, we looked at decoding, word phonemics, phrasal phonology, recitation, and script reading. So thank you very much for joining me today. I hope you all have a lovely and God-blessed and God-given weekend full of spiritual journeys towards good things and full of joy and peace and happiness. Smash that like button and I will catch you next time. See you everyone. Bye-bye.